Welcome everyone again to Exploring Quality in Family Child Care. This month we are talking about open-ended questions. So as usual, we are going to start by placing this in two different standards that are interested in increasing quality in early childhood education. The first being Satellite's accreditation standards. And this shows up in section 3, and it states that the educator uses a variety of techniques to do all the things to address, extend, and support children's development and self-guided play. And one of those techniques, one of the substandards, is that the educator observes and describes to children what they are doing and asks them, yes, open-ended questions about their activities. So you can see here it's in the standards as one of those techniques to address, extend, and support children's self-guided play. And we're going to talk more about what that means later on today. This also shows up in the Wisconsin Model Early Learning Standards, and it shows up in language development and communication. And the program standard for this is that early learning programs in Wisconsin, they're going to provide the environment, the context, the opportunities for children to develop their ability to communicate and speak. Now, one of the sample strategies for this standard speaks about open-ended questions. So a sample strategy for adults would be to encourage conversations with the child by asking the child open-ended questions, such as, then they give a few examples. Tell me more about your toy. What did you see at the park today? Or tell me more about what you and Sally did at the park. And we're going to get into this, but as always, we're going to start by placing it in two different standards. We've seen where this shows up, and now we're going to talk about why they refer to open-ended questions. Starting off with an open-ended question to yourself, and it being this one. What do you enjoy most about your career in early childhood education? Liz says the kids' interactions, seeing their growth and joy, etc., etc. Georgina says developing relationships with kids and seeing their growth. I love watching little minds go from needing help doing everything to so much independence. I love watching the growth, both physically and emotionally. So if you're still typing, please continue typing. I'm seeing themes of goals and interactions, watching children grow and develop, and your relationships with children. And I appreciate that you took the time to really think about your response, formulate it, and send it into the chat. So I would encourage you, I did not read them all. The chat can be a space for you to react and respond to other participants' messages as well. But the point of why I ask this question is because it's setting up this idea of an open-ended question. So open-ended questions, simply put, they're prompts with many possible responses. So you could see that in your messages that you sent through the chat. People are coming with their unique story to tell, things that they enjoy and that they're choosing to pull out and respond in the chat. Think about how you may have answered if I had asked you simply, do you like your job? Which again, that is a more closed-ended question. You may say yes or no, or you might respond in one or two words. So we're setting it up right now, open-ended questions, prompts with many possible responses. So now we're going to talk about why use open-ended questions, why they are so critical for young children. And then we're going to talk about, and we're going to explore how to identify, say, an open-ended question and a closed-ended question. And we're going to end with the tricky part. How do you do this in your program with a group of mixed ages? So we're going to start with the motivation to do so today. Open-ended questions lead to complex, meaningful conversations with adults. And those conversations help children practice and develop their verbal communication skills. And verbal language, that encompasses uh, vocabulary, so children knowing what words are and what they mean, and also grammar. So knowing how to arrange words into phrases and sentences in order to communicate. And verbal communication is something that precedes, it comes before children learning to read. Vocabulary and grammar is a significant factor when children are developing the skills to learn to read. Children with larger vocabularies, they're going to have an easier time sounding out words and placing those words into context because they have a larger catalog to draw on. So verbal communication is that significant factor in children's ability to pick up reading and eventually read to learn. Learning to read becomes so automatic that children then begin reading to learn. And typically we see this shift around third grade. If children do not acquire the skill of becoming sufficient readers and becoming more automatic with the ability to then read to learn, there's going to be a cumulative effect, and over time it's going to be harder for them to catch up. So again, the verbal communication piece, that factor that leads to reading acquisition and being able to have success in school, that starts with open-ended questions and meaningful back and forth conversations. And there's research to back this up, that open-ended questions this is a mechanism for this pathway that we see here. In one study done by Lee, Kinsey, and Whittaker in 2012, they looked at 2 different preschool rooms. One of them just went about their normal business, and the other one, they gave coaching and training on how to use open-ended questions. And some time passed. They looked at video observations in the classroom at the end of the year, and they found that the children in the group where their educators had been trained on using open-ended questions, not only did it work, they received more open-ended questions, but they used a significant greater number of words and more complex sentences than the children in the room where the educators were not offered the coaching and training. So again, we're thinking about this from the perspective of pre-literacy skills. Open-ended questioning is a technique to prompt children to practice their verbal communication, which again helps them in learning to read and eventually reading to learn. So you may be wondering, well, what does this look like for children who are learning 2 languages at once, 2 or more, I should say, also known as dual language learners? One study in 2023 looked at 64 educators. They were serving children who were learning 2 languages at once. Again, similar, you had one group going about their business, the other one received that coaching and training. And they wanted to know what type of interactions between educators and children were the most significant predictor of children's English language outcomes. So they looked at a lot of different types of interactions. They looked at contextualized language, so that's language about the here and now. They looked at decontextualized language, so that's something that's removed from the immediate environment. Say you're talking to a child about their home or their pet. They looked at things like singing, giving directions, and responsive language. In responsive language, that's language that promotes the reciprocity, the back and forth. So open-ended questions was one of those categories that fell into responsive language. So they looked at all of this and they found that despite it being very low, there being a very low level of occurrence in programs, responsive language, which included open-ended questions, was the most significant indicator of what's going to lead to children's English language outcomes. And they theorized that this is the case because children who are asked open-ended questions by their adults They're given the opportunity to both practice and then receive immediate feedback on their ability to produce verbal language in their second language that they're learning. So again, this also talks about, and there's research that shows that it's especially important for dual language learners as well. So now we are going to talk about another component that open-ended questions help support, and that's critical thinking skills. And critical thinking is vital. These are things that we'll get to some of the critical thinking skills that open-ended questions ask children to call on, but it's an important key part of having academic success later on. So these questions encourage children to express and elaborate upon their thinking, their rationale for their thoughts. And one study done in 2016 by Kakir looked at how does socioeconomic status, how does family background play into this component. And they found that children from families with high monthly income and higher education, those children were asked significantly more questions than children from families with lower education levels and lower monthly incomes. And this researcher argued that exposure to open-ended questions, because they require those critical thinking skills, exposure to them so young, before they enter school, that might be something to target to help bridge the achievement gap. So it might be something to focus on, asking children from all backgrounds more open-ended questions. And now we're going to cover just a few examples of how open-ended questions spark critical thinking skills. So open-ended questions, they may prompt children to apply what they already know to solve a problem. So things like, how would you build your tower taller? What could you do to fix your artwork? Adults, and we'll talk more about this when we identify open-ended versus closed-ended questions, but adults can help children who have more limited skills solve problems, still asking open-ended questions, but breaking it down into more manageable steps. Open-ended questions, they also help children evaluate things, practice their evaluation skills. So questions like, how would you do it next time? Or why are they sad? So evaluations, these types of questions, they prompt children to process things such as like how they relate to others or what they like and what they don't like. And two more that we'll cover right now. Open-ended questions help children consider consequences of their actions and make predictions about what could happen next. So a sentence starter for that would be, what do you think will happen if? So again, there are other benefits of open-ended questions. We're focused mainly today on the two big ones, those pre-literacy skills and children's critical thinking skills. So now we're going to focus on how can you identify an open-ended question and a closed-ended question. So we're going to talk about the differences now between both of them. An open-ended question, as I've already said, I think about 5 times, statements with many possible responses. So those are questions that are prompting children to respond, and they begin that back and forth conversation, that reciprocity that was identified to be so important in academic literature for children's language outcomes and their critical thinking skills. So open-ended questions, again, they prompt children to reflect, to think about, solve problems, evaluate their surroundings and their actions, and practice those verbal communication skills. So some examples of sentence starters would be, what do you notice? Why do you think? Tell me about. Or how did you? In contrast, a closed-ended questions, those are answers that are typically answered in 1 to 2 words. Most often they're going to have a right or a wrong answer. So you're going to use these if you're seeking specific information or you want to confirm that a child understands something that you're saying to them. So closed-ended questions, they're beneficial to use for this reason when prompting children to make decisions. There was a case study that was done by Bain Hartman in 2015. They looked at 2 different preschool educators and they were specifically looking at questions. They wanted to know what types of questions are educators asking children. And they found that the majority of questions were mostly knowledge level and closed-ended questions. Knowledge level, like 75% of the time, and closed-ended being almost 90% of the time. So we know this is a common type of question that you're asking children. And I know I was very guilty of this as an educator. I feel like this particularly, you fall into this of only asking closed-ended questions, particularly to toddlers. So it's important, again, to be mindful about asking even the littles, those open-ended broad questions. Some examples of closed-ended questions would be, do you like? What color? Where does this go? Your hands go? Are you? So those are some examples of those closed-ended question prompts. And now you'll get a break from listening to me talk and we'll watch a video again, just speaking to this idea of the difference between open-ended and closed-ended questions. And then we're going to try some examples together.
To make it, to fold it and
A simple way to support play is to ask open-ended questions, such as, tell me about what you've drawn, or tell me about your game today, or what is this world that you have created here?
I want to use it.
What could you use that for?
I'm going to colour on here. It's a bit tough.
It's a bit tricky, isn't it?
So questions that allow for the child to talk about how they felt about something, to describe what they've been doing.
Oh, and what have you put in there?
Little things. Pods.
And maybe allow them to think of a new way, a new avenue that they might take that play.
Can you tell me about what you've done?
This is a bit tall, so no water can go over it.
That's fantastic. So that bit stops the water getting in?
Yeah.
Blue paper.
I just want it to be this size.
You're going to put it on the sides. How are you going to do that?
So now we're going to think about the difference between, again, the closed-ended versus an open-ended question for children. So when thinking about asking children to talk about their creations, what they've done, what they've built, what they've painted, think about the difference between these 2 statements. How many blocks did you use? This is a closed-ended statement. And with this question, you're asking for specific information. You as an educator, you're wondering, okay, can this child count? Or let's practice counting with this child. And again, it's closed-ended because there's one right answer to this. And again, it's not really promoting a conversation. And then we get to the open-ended prompt. Tell me about what you built. And I think about all of us here, we probably have so many unique, creative, interesting stories that we've heard from children about all of the things that they've created and built. But think about the difference between those 2 prompts. If you only had to ask the child one of them, or if you only had enough time to engage the child in asking one question, the difference in both of those responses you might get. So now we're going to think about maybe you're reading a book to a young child. Think about the difference between these two statements. What color is this? Again, closed-ended, you want to know, okay, does this child know what yellow is? All right, there's a right answer to this, and it's going to be answered in maybe 1 to 2 words. That's a closed-ended question. The open-ended prompt would be, what do you think will happen next? Now, that's a big question. It forces children to think about, you know, and understand what's been going on so far. And now I'm going to make a prediction about what happens next. So that may be too big of a question for the younger children, such as your toddlers. So you're going to have to adjust the open-ended question to be more developmentally appropriate. So it might have to be more specific. I think about the image here with Alexis and this young child. Maybe you're reading the book, The Very Hungry Caterpillar, with a toddler. You may, instead of saying, what do you think will happen next? You might ask, what do you think he will eat next? It's open-ended. There are so many different things that an infant or toddler could say to this. It's more specific and it's more developmentally appropriate while still being open-ended. So again, there are a few ways to engage with children in terms of questioning. We know the benefits now of open-ended questions. So there's a time and a place to do both of them, making sure that you're focusing on prompts with many different types of responses. So now thinking about asking children about their preferences. So asking a child, do you like apples? A closed-ended question, you're asking a child like yes or no, do you like something or do you not like something? An open-ended prompt may be, what is your favorite food? Again, that's a really big question that is forcing children to recall, okay, what are the foods that I've had in my life? What do I like? And then now I got to choose one of them as my favorite. That's going to be fairly challenging for most toddlers. So maybe asking something, starting with that closed-ended question, do you like apples? And then following it up with, what do you like about it? And who knows, depending on your group, those young children, they may not have the words to describe what they like about apples. So that's where you would model to the child. You would say, I like apples because they are crunchy and sweet. So you're offering them the words if they're not yet ready to answer some of those big open-ended questions. So we're going to watch this video. It is a fantastic example of exactly what we've been talking about in action. So we're going to see how Valerie Johnson, owner of Tiny Treasures Family Childcare, uses a variety of techniques to expand on this child's play. So we're going to listen for both closed-ended and open-ended questions.
Hayden, do you want to have the Legos that we got out so you don't want them?
I don't.
Oh, what are you seeing there? You love anything with wheels.
We're done. What is yours?
Oh, done. What do you got? Now jump them in the sink.
Where's your grinder?
What did you grind up?
The onion.
You grind up the onions. Ah.
One onion.
One onion? Oh, you ground up one onion.
What else?
Now what are you going to do with your grinder?
In there
One tomato? Yeah, grinding up one tomato.
So Valerie asks this child, what did you grind up? A closed-ended question. I can see, answering in 1 to 2 words. And that child answers the onion, one onion. So both of those sentences are 2-word sentences. And then Valerie asks, now what are you going to do with your grinder? It's a fairly open-ended prompt. There are many possible responses to this. And the child responds, I just want to cook some tomatoes in it. 1 tomato. Now he's using an 8-word sentence. I love this clip because it's such a subtle difference captured in one very short clip. The difference between a child's response to a closed-ended question versus an open-ended question. And again, you think about the cumulative effects of children who are using more complex sentences. They're going to practice their verbal communication skills more, and they're going to have larger vocabularies, which again is helping them eventually with learning to read and reading to learn. So now we're going to practice this together as a group. What open-ended question could you ask this group of children? And for those of you who are here today who do this often already, what are some of those open-ended prompts that you have in your back pocket that you pull out? What are you looking for? Jaleesa says, do you see anything? What color is the grass? So I'm seeing in that response both open-ended prompts and closed-ended prompts. Nice. How are you feeling today? Great example of a general open-ended question. Ooh, Chastity says, what color is the grass? What else is the same color as the grass? So started with that closed-ended prompt, and now we're talking about comparison, similarities and differences. What else do you see? What else is the same color as grass? How does the grass feel on your hands? That's one of the open-ended prompts that came to mind first for me. How does that feel? Yeah, all fantastic examples of open-ended prompts that you could ask this group of children. Thank you all for your responses. So now that we've covered the why, the what of open-ended questions, you may be wondering, well, how do I do this when I have a group of mixed ages? What does this look like in real life? And that's what we're going to finish up our time talking about together today. How can you use open-ended questions in your programs? And to start off this portion, I have another question for you to sit and reflect for a moment, because there's a lot to do in the day. Think about a recent conversation you've had with children in your program. Does this happen at a certain time of day? What did that look like? Who was involved? Take a moment and think about, what do conversations look like in your program? And if you're willing and able, we, again, would love to hear from you in the chat. Chastity said, during reading, what a fantastic time to open up conversation. She asks, what's happening in the book? What do you remember from the story? How does that make you feel? Destiny says, one-on-one during painting. Great time to have conversations with children. Aria says, I interact mostly with ones and twos, so conversations can be limited, but my kids converse most during free play and things they have interest in. Liz says meal times. Lisa says carpet time. Mary, story time and art time. Yeah, I'm seeing a theme here. Although some of you identified that those one-on-one conversations are happening with children, a lot of our big conversations in an early learning program may happen when we're all in a group together. We're all focused on doing the same thing, whether that be reading a book or having a meal together, maybe everyone is engaged in art at the same time. So maybe just for the purposes of today, let's just talk about mealtime. because mealtime can be such a rich opportunity to have conversations with multiple children. And again, when you have a group of mixed ages, this can be tricky because you may have children who are older who can easily carry on a conversation with you, and they may be very comfortable filling the space with that. So it's your job as an educator to hold in mind those younger children or children who may be shyer, and model that turn taking with children when you're conversing as a group together. So I think about an example, maybe one of your toddlers went camping this past weekend with their grandma. So at breakfast on Monday morning, you may say, "Hey, Maddie, how was camping this weekend? What did you think of sleeping in a tent?" And then, because it's mealtime and you have all of your other children there, you might hear simultaneously, "I've slept in a tent before," or "I've seen that on Bluey," and everyone just wants to start talking at once. But again, it's your job as an educator, because we're helping children practice reciprocity and turn taking, that you may have to say, I asked Maddie, I want to hear her response, and then you can tell me about your story. And who knows, maybe that toddler is like, I don't really want to say anything, or I don't want to answer that, and that's okay. But it's important that and we'll talk more about this in a minute, it's important that you provide the space for all children to answer open-ended prompts together. Here is a video showcasing just some more techniques on implementing how you can use those high-quality open-ended questions in your program. This video is specifically aimed at the toddler age range.
A level 3 qualified practitioner and an early education editor here at Family.
Hey, Julie.
Early education editor here at Family.
And I'm Aaron. I'm an early education editor, and I was once a toddler myself. Today, we're asking why open-ended questions are so important in the early years, which in itself is an open-ended question. So we're off to a great start. So Julia, why is it that open-ended questions are so important in early education?
Well, open-ended questions show children that we're inviting them to speak and think about something. A closed question gets a simple answer, but an open-ended question starts a conversation. It's the difference between asking, "Did you have fun?" and "What was it like?" One will get you a yes or a no, and the other will get you an exciting insight into what the child actually experienced. And that's important, because it conveys to the child that we care about how they think and feel about things.
But isn't any question inviting a child to tell us what they think? I mean, they have to think of an answer, right?
Well, not necessarily. Children are still learning the norms of conversation and communication. As adults, we know that a question like, "Hey, did you see so-and-so?" is an invitation to talk about that thing and share an opinion, whereas children might just see it as a yes or no question. Similarly, if you want a child to consider what they're doing, just saying, "Do you think that's a good idea?" isn't necessarily going to work. As adults, we know that means, "I think that it's not very safe and maybe we should think of a safer way of doing it," but children might not get that. So an explicit open-ended question can help, like, how can we make that a bit safer?
Okay, that makes sense. But what's so bad about closed questions?
Well, closed questions have a limited range of responses, and often a right one and a wrong one. Children may feel the pressure to please an adult by looking to give the correct answer, or feel like you're testing them, rather than just enjoying their company. For example, asking what shape is the triangle lets you know that they know what a triangle is, but so what? Have a conversation instead, and you'll find out much more about the child's development. Open-ended questions spark conversations, which allow an increase for vocabulary. It helps build relationships and learning, and test hypotheses and concepts and ideas.
Okay, well, you sold me on open-ended questions. But while we're here, do you have any tips for how people can do this in the classroom?
So many. Well, 3, but they're really good tips. Number 1, don't ask questions that you already know the answer to.
You'll be surprised how easily young children know when you're doing this. Instead, you can investigate with children. Instead of, "Where will the ball go?" you could say, "I'm wondering about what happens when I let go of this ball. What do you think will happen? How could I find out?"
Number 2, Pitch questions to children's level of development.
Depending on a child's stage of development, completely open-ended questions could be sort of overwhelming and result in a closed-off, I don't know. Use sustained shared thinking to build up that conversation. Without context, what shall we do now? Might be too much to start with. So you could build up with relatively open choices like, should we play outside or inside, and why?
And number 3, don't force question time.
If children are too engaged in their play to answer you, it's okay to just leave them be. Remember, it's about interacting, not interfering or interrupting. So don't get so wrapped up in worrying about open-ended questions or holding eye contact that you forget to connect with the child. Ultimately, it's not about questions but making a conversation, so it's okay to take turns, take your time, and give children space when they need it.
So, what are some ways that you could practice using open-ended questions? Share them with us in the comments down below.
And don't forget to head over to our
One message in this video that I find particularly powerful is the acknowledgement that us as adults, we have this understanding that closed-ended questions, most often they're going to be inviting conversation of some sort. And children don't yet know this. So a closed-ended question really to a child is either a yes or no, or a 1 or 2 word response, and that's it. Open-ended questions are those questions that are sparking that reciprocal back and forth. So when I think about the first question that I posed to the group, what do you enjoy most about your career? If I had asked you, do you like your job? Some of you, depending on the context, might have said yes or no and then expanded on it. And that's coming from our adult brains of understanding that sometimes a closed-ended question is inviting conversation. Children don't yet have that understanding. So that's why we're really focused on putting more emphasis on the open-ended prompts for children.
blog.
So we covered some of these already, and I will have Laura, our host, send this resource in the chat for all of you. It'll be a link that it just offers different types of open-ended questions and examples of each of them with sentence starters for you to consider as well. This is a skill that not everyone has, and that it takes a while to really be intentional and think about what types of questions are you asking children. So thank you, Laura, for sending that in the chat. And again, that resource goes deeper into each of these. A couple of them that we didn't focus on yet was stretching children's thinking. So as you heard in the video, what would happen if I dropped the ball down the ramp? It also prompts children to think about similarities and differences, which came up earlier when I asked all of you to send open-ended prompts. How are these things the same? How are they different? What makes these things go together? So those are just some more of the ways that open-ended questions can be used to engage children's thinking while also having them use their verbal communication skills. Again, this is a skill that needs to be worked at over time because as some of the earlier research that we spoke on today shows, it is very common to ask children closed-ended questions. It is often educators' default question to particularly the very young children. So one way to remind yourself to use more open-ended prompts is to simply have them written down, sentence starters, and post them throughout your environment. So again, this can be helpful for getting those sentence starters, offering yourself a resource for, okay, how should I phrase this to be more open-ended? And also just as a reminder to do so. And here is an example at Scribbles and Giggles Family Child Care in Neenah. Michelle printed off quite a few different questions that she can ask children. specific to learning areas, so different learning areas that she has in her environment. And I know it's small. I'll read a couple of them. She has them on a ring that she can refer back to in her program when she's engaging with children. So for the Block Center, a question may be, why did you arrange your blocks this way? Or how can you stop the blocks from falling? Or something like, which part of the building was harder to build? So again, I don't know, for me, those can be hard questions to dig deep in the moment. So it's something like an open-ended prompt ring or something posted in your environment can be helpful when engaging in those real moment conversations with children. So at the end of the day, there's a statement here. It is more than simply asking the open-ended question. Wozik and Heinemann in 2011, they wanted to know how educator interactions related to just the overall program quality. So they observed educators reading books to children, and they found that it wasn't the amount of open-ended questions, but rather the amount of time children had to respond to open-ended questions. That was the significant predictor of vocabulary development throughout a year's time. So there was no difference in new vocabulary learned for a group of children with an educator that asked 5 open-ended questions during one book reading and 20. The important piece of this is actually children's opportunities, the space and time they're allowed to give their responses and practice their vocabulary. So this study in particular shows this unique value of children's responses to those open-ended prompts. And one of the ways you can do this is, again, focus on that reciprocity, that back and forth. You may be asking a child during story time a question, elicit multiple responses from children, or ask follow-up questions to engage children in a meaningful conversation. So again, this study focuses on, it's not just about asking the open-ended question. It's children's opportunity to respond that is impactful, particularly for their vocabulary development. Wait time. Wait time is waiting a significant amount of time for a child to respond. So this is a technique that is not commonly implemented in early learning settings. Most studies show that educators, they won't wait more than 1 second after asking a prompt or saying something to a child before interacting again. And when researchers ask educators why is this happening, they get responses such as, I don't want them to disengage, or I worry that it would cause a disruption if I waited too long. And although this may be true for some children and in some cases, wait time, it's crucial to wait a significant amount of time and give children time and space to not only think about their answer, think about the words and how to communicate their answer. So research on wait time suggests waiting at least 3 seconds. But for younger children, it's going to be up to 5 to 7 seconds, which actually doesn't sound like a long time, but it can feel like a long time as an adult. 5 to 7 seconds, particularly for infants and toddlers, after asking the open-ended prompt. Children, when this pattern emerges, when you continually wait, children will provide more high-quality responses, and they're going to learn that they have more time to come up with their answer when you have this pattern of asking a question and then waiting. One last component of this is that after a child responds, pause again. This is really hard to do and it feels very unnatural. Implement that wait time again. At least 3 seconds. before responding again to the child. It gives children, one, it gives them an opportunity to add more to their response if they want to. And it also balances the conversation. So if children need 3 to 5 to 7 seconds to come up with a response to your open-ended question, and then you immediately hit them with another question or a response, over time, that might feel overwhelming to a child. So it is recommended that you just pause those extra 3 seconds before interacting again and responding. And it also models for children that it is okay to wait for a second and to really think about how you're going to be interacting with other people. So again, often wait time in general is a missed opportunity, particularly pausing before responding again to a child is another technique that can really help balance that conversation and get children wanting to speak more to you and have longer conversations. Now, I know what you might be thinking. You might say, okay, well, I asked an open-ended question. I waited a long time, a considerable amount of time, and the child did not respond. So in this scenario, which is, I'm sure you all have dealt with this countless times, one technique for this is to model a potential response. So modeling a response, you might get the child to engage with you, potentially not, and that's fine. You are modeling this pattern of communication and nurturing children's social and emotional skills when you are inquiring about their interests and their play using those open-ended prompts. So, and when you model a response, you are also giving them the words to say when they're not really interested in having a conversation with you right now. You may say to a child that did not respond, "You are really busy with your baby doll. I will talk with you later." Because let's face it, some children, they don't want to have a conversation with you while they're engaged in play. So, you might ask them something and they're like, look, they might be thinking like, I'm already overwhelmed with the needs of my baby doll right now in the kitchen, and I'm not really interested in talking with you. And that's fine. You're going to learn over time the individual children that you have in your program and how you feel as an educator. How is it best to incorporate some of these prompts throughout the day? And it might not be while children are engaged in play. I want to thank all of you for your participation today. Thank you.